Maria keeps every dollar she earns locked inside a savings account where she can watch the balance grow. Derek borrows every dollar the bank will let him have and pours it into assets. Both believe they're handling money the smart way. One is quietly going broke standing still. The other is getting richer in his sleep, for reasons neither can fully explain. Here is the part nobody tells you. The dollars themselves are shrinking right now, today. The cash sitting in Maria's account is worth a little less than it was this morning. And when you stretch their two lives out across 30 years, the gap between them will make your stomach drop. Let's keep this fair. Maria and Derek earn the same salary. They both start with $50,000. Same age, same city, same paycheck. The only thing that separates them is what they understand about money. My name is Yank, and this is the one invisible force that quietly decides who ends up rich and who ends up broke. Let's meet them properly. Maria is the responsible one, the one your parents would brag about. She never gambles. She never speculates. She never buys things she can't afford. Her $50,000 sits in a savings account earning interest, and every month she adds a bit more. Whenever she checks her balance, the number is always a little higher than before. It feels solid. It feels safe. When her coworkers panic about a stock market crash, she feels quietly superior, because her balance never drops. Not by a single dollar. Derek does almost the opposite. He treats cash like it's on fire and can't wait to get rid of it. He puts his money into index funds. He makes a down payment on a house and locks himself into a 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, committing to roughly $2,000 a month for the next 3 decades. His friends think he's lost his mind. He is in debt up to his eyeballs, owing the bank more money than he's ever held in his life. At a dinner party, Maria can say, "My savings keep growing and I owe nobody anything." Derek has to admit, "I'm $300,000 in debt, and most of what I own could drop 20% next year." Nobody at that table is impressed with Derek. And on day one, they're right not to be. Maria looks like the grown-up in the room. Derek looks like someone one bad month away from disaster. But feelings and math are two completely different things, and inflation is the slow machine that turns one into the other. So let's actually define the thing, because most people throw the word around without understanding what it's doing to them. Inflation isn't just prices climbing. That's only the symptom. The real event is that your dollar is steadily losing its power to buy things. Same dollar, less stuff you can trade it for. And here's the part that should genuinely bother you: the official inflation rate has swung wildly over the last few years, but even during the calm stretches, the underlying trend usually grinds along around 3%. Let's be conservative, though, and use a boring, long-run number. Say prices climb about 2.5% a year, every year, forever. That sounds like nothing. That sounds like a rounding error. It is not a rounding error. It is a silent tax, one nobody voted for and nobody ever mails you a bill for. Watch what this does to Maria. Her savings account, like most savings accounts in this country, pays her about 1/3 of 1%. Meanwhile, her dollars are losing value at 2.5% or more every year. So every single year, the responsible saver, the one doing everything the textbooks recommend, is quietly sliding backward by roughly 2% without ever spending a dime. She is being charged for the privilege of holding cash. She simply can't see the charge, because the number on her screen keeps climbing. That's the trap. The number goes up while quietly meaning less. Economists have a technical name for this: the gap between nominal and real. Nominal is the number you see. Real is what that number can actually buy. And nearly everyone in this country runs their entire financial life staring at the nominal number, feeling great, while the real number quietly bleeds out. Here's where it gets strange, because that same force draining Maria is simultaneously paying Derek. And nobody ever puts this part on a thumbnail. Derek owes the bank a lot of money, but his debt is fixed. That $2,000 mortgage payment never changes, not in year 1 and not in year 30. Now think about what inflation does to a number that's frozen in place. If everything else in the economy keeps getting pricier, wages, rent, groceries, even his own salary, but his mortgage payment stays exactly the same, then every year that payment becomes a little easier to make. In real terms, it shrinks. By year 20, that $2,000 payment feels like roughly $1,200 of today's dollars. By year 30, it feels like under $1,000. He's paying the bank back in dollars that are worth less and less, while the house those dollars bought keeps climbing in price. It's as if inflation is quietly eating his debt while feeding his assets at the exact same time. He didn't earn that outcome through effort. He simply understood which side of the table to sit on. And here's the uncomfortable truth underneath all of it. Inflation never destroys money. It moves it. Every ounce of purchasing power that leaks out of Maria's savings account doesn't vanish into thin air, it gets transferred somewhere else. So let's name exactly where it goes, because this is the hidden engine of the whole economy, and nobody teaches it in school. It goes to debtors. Anyone who borrowed at a fixed rate gets to repay the loan with cheaper dollars later. Inflation acts like a slow, silent forgiveness program for people carrying debt. It goes to asset holders too, people who own stocks, real estate, or businesses, things whose prices rise with inflation or even faster, and their wealth floats upward on the same tide that's sinking the saver. And more than anywhere else, it goes to the single biggest borrower on the planet, the government. National debt is just a giant pile of fixed dollar obligations, and a stretch of steady inflation quietly shrinks the real size of that pile. There's a reason economists sometimes call inflation a stealth tax. It does exactly what a tax does, moving money from your pocket to borrowers, except no politician ever has to stand up and vote for it. Then there's the part that really stings. Remember back in the mid-2020s, when the central bank spiked interest rates to fight that huge inflation wave? Savers were finally supposed to catch a break. Rates sat above 5% for a long stretch. And yet the average big bank savings account in America still paid less than 1%. They handed you a free pen and quietly kept the profit for themselves. That spread, the gap between what the financial system earns on your money and what it actually pays you, doesn't disappear. It just becomes someone else's profit. I'm not telling you any of this to make you angry at banks, or at Derek, or at anyone else. Nobody here is twirling a mustache. This is simply how the machine is built. The point is that the machine has a near side and a far side, and which one you end up standing on mostly comes down to whether you understand the rules. Quick aside, then straight back to Maria and Derek. If breaking money down like this is the kind of content you enjoy, I run a community where I teach people how to build a faceless channel that does exactly this kind of explainer. It's linked below if you're curious. If not, no worries at all, the rest of this story stands entirely on its own. Okay, back to our two friends. Let's jump ahead to year 5. On the surface, nothing dramatic has happened. Maria is still saving diligently. Her balance keeps growing. She got a raise at work. A respectable 3% bump, and it genuinely felt good. Here's what she didn't notice: prices that year rose by more than 3%. So the raise she celebrated was, in real terms, actually a pay cut. She now has more dollars and less buying power, and she has no idea, because the only number she ever looks at is the one climbing upward. This is the quiet heartbreak buried in the whole system. A raise smaller than inflation isn't really a raise at all. It's a polite, smiling demotion. Derek, meanwhile, has been doing almost nothing, and that's worth repeating because it's the entire point. He isn't day trading. He isn't flipping houses. He set things up once and then mostly left them alone. His index funds wobbled, they dropped one year and it made him feel sick, but they recovered and kept climbing after that. His house rose in value. His mortgage payment stayed exactly, perfectly frozen. He simply lived his life while inflation quietly worked the night shift on his behalf. By year 10, the two lines on the chart have genuinely pulled apart. Remember, they both started with the same $50,000. Maria kept hers in cash, played it safe, and in real buying power. That $50,000 is now worth somewhere around $41,000. It lost ground while sitting perfectly still. Derek put his into assets, and in today's purchasing power, his is now worth close to $100,000. Same starting line, roughly 2.5 times the outcome. And the gap isn't closing, it's accelerating, because the gains are now compounding on top of bigger gains. Maria has compounding too, just working against her. Let me put you inside their actual lives for a moment, because numbers on a screen don't bleed, but people do. Around year 10, Maria finally goes to buy the thing she had been saving for, a small weekend place by the lake she'd had her eye on since her 20s. She had watched her balance climb for a decade and finally felt ready. Except the lake house had climbed too. The one that cost $200,000 when she started is now closer to $340,000. And the bank wants a bigger down payment than she has, because her carefully guarded pile of cash grew slower than the very thing she was saving to buy. She didn't lose the race. She ran it the entire time, never missing a single payment to herself. The finish line just kept moving, and nobody warned her it was on wheels. Derek has the opposite kind of morning. He gets the same 3% raise Maria got, but his biggest monthly expense, that mortgage, hasn't budged a single dollar in 10 years. So this time the raise actually lands in his pocket and stays there. He notices, almost guiltily, that his house payment now feels small. The very number that made him look reckless at that dinner party has quietly become the smartest decision he ever made. He's not smarter than Maria. He didn't work harder than she did. He simply bought something that fights for him while he sleeps, and he borrowed in a way that gets lighter every year instead of heavier. Same paycheck, same raise, same 3 decades, and one of them is being gently lifted while the other is being gently pushed under. Both of them are smiling. Neither is entirely sure why. This is where I want you to really feel how sneaky this whole thing is. If you asked Maria, she would tell you she's ahead. Her account balance is the highest it has ever been. She has never lost a single dollar. By every number she actually looks at, she believes she's winning. There's a term for this, the money illusion, and it isn't stupidity, it's simply human wiring. We feel the dollar amount, not the dollar's actual worth. It's why a $5 coffee feels outrageous to your father and completely normal to you. Same coffee, different dollar. The dollar got smaller, and most people simply never updated the picture in their head. And if all of this feels abstract, here's the bad news, you've already lived through the fast-forward version of it. A few years ago, inflation didn't creep, it sprinted, hitting about 9% in a single year, the worst stretch in 4 decades. You remember it even if you don't remember the exact number. Egg prices doubled. A grocery run somehow cost $40 more than it did the month before for the exact same boring cart of food. Gas prices were high enough that you'd drive an extra 10 minutes just to avoid a certain station. Surveys from that period found that more than half the country called grocery prices a major source of stress, and for lower-income households, it was closer to 2/3. That wasn't a spreadsheet. That was real people standing in a checkout line doing math they never signed up for. The central bank slammed the brakes, yanking interest rates from basically zero to past 5%, and eventually the fever broke. But here's what almost nobody noticed once the panic faded, prices didn't go back down. They almost never do. Inflation cooling off just means prices are climbing more slowly. The higher prices stay right where they landed. So even during the good years, the dollar keeps melting, just quietly enough that you stop paying attention, which is exactly when it does the most damage. Let me make this concrete, because numbers on a screen are easy to ignore until you see what they actually mean. Go back to 1970. A gallon of gas cost about 36 cents. A postage stamp cost 6 cents. A brand new car cost a little under $4,000. And a typical new house in America ran around $24,000. Now look around. In 2026, that same stamp costs 84 cents. That same new car runs north of $52,000. And that house? You're looking at north of $450,000. Same items, just a much scarier amount of paper required to own them. A dollar from 1970 buys you roughly 12 cents worth of stuff today. Which means if your grandfather had stuffed a single dollar under his mattress back then, and you found it now, it would have lost about 88% of its power. Not because anyone stole it, but because it simply sat there while the world repriced around it. That mattress was the worst performing investment in the entire house, and it didn't even have the decency to lose the number. It only lost the meaning. Then there's the modern, pettier version of all this, shrinkflation. The bag of chips that's now legally classified as mostly air. The roll of paper towels that quietly lost 20 sheets. The cereal box you could practically read a newspaper through. Companies figured out that you'll notice a price going up, but you usually won't notice the package getting smaller, so they shrink the product instead of raising the sticker. To be fair, the government looked into this, and across the whole economy, shrinkflation is actually a tiny sliver of total inflation. A fraction of 1%. But in the categories where it hits, it stings. Coffee packaging shrank enough in some cases to add the equivalent of a 30% per unit increase. So no, you're not imagining it, and no, it isn't the main event. It's just the part you can hold in your hand and get mad about. Now let's run this all the way out, because this is where the story stops being a slow drift and becomes a canyon. By year 20, Maria's safe, responsible $50,000 has the real buying power of about $32,000. It's been on a diet she never agreed to. Push it to year 30, a normal working career, and her cash is worth around $24,000 in real terms. She did everything right and still lost roughly half her wealth to an invisible thief. Derek's is worth somewhere near $380,000, about 14 times the exact same starting point. The only variable that ever differed between them was what each one believed a dollar actually was. And Derek's mortgage, the very debt that made him look reckless at that dinner party 25 years earlier, is nearly paid off in dollars so shrunken that the final payments barely register. He looked irresponsible for one evening and got rewarded for 3 decades. Now, if I stopped here, I'd be doing exactly what every finance guy on the internet does, showing you one clean side of the story and pretending the other side doesn't exist. So let me be honest about where Maria was actually right, because she was right about real things. Cash has a genuine job to do. When Derek's investments dropped that one year and he felt sick about it, Maria slept just fine, because her money doesn't move. If either of them had faced an emergency, a job loss, a medical bill, a busted transmission, Maria could have handled it instantly, while Derek might have been forced to sell an asset at the worst possible moment and lock in a real loss. That's not nothing. That's the entire reason you keep an emergency fund. The lesson was never hold zero cash. Holding zero cash is its own kind of reckless. The real lesson is don't hold idle excess cash and call it safe, because past your emergency cushion, safe is exactly what it isn't. And assets aren't a magic escalator either. Stocks are genuinely volatile. A few years back the market fell almost 20% in a single year, and plenty of people panic sold at the bottom and never recovered. Real estate can sit empty, leak, and tie up your money for years at a time. Every single tool that beats inflation comes with some kind of catch, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. So what actually works? Owning pieces of the economy through index funds, so your money rides the same wave that's lifting prices. Owning a home with a fixed-rate mortgage, so inflation eats away at your debt instead of your savings. And for the more cautious among us, there are tools built exactly for this: treasury bonds whose value rises with inflation, and savings bonds from the government that adjust along with it. At one point during the last inflation spike, those savings bonds were paying over 9%, while the bank down the street was still offering 1/3 of 1% and a free pen. The tools exist. Most people just never go looking for them, because the bank account feels safe and looking feels like work. So here's where Maria and Derek actually end up. Same salary, same starting $50,000, same 30 years. One of them did everything she was told, saved diligently, avoided debt entirely, never lost a single dollar, and quietly went backward the entire time. The other took on debt, bought things that scared him, did almost nothing for decades, and let an invisible force do the heavy lifting on his behalf. Maria didn't lose because she was lazy or foolish. She lost because she was playing a game without knowing its rules, defending a dollar that was melting in her own hand. Derek didn't win because he was some kind of genius. He won because he understood one single thing: the dollar is a melting ice cube, and you can either hold it and watch it disappear, or trade it for something that grows faster than it melts. That's the real trap, and it was never really cash versus stocks, or saving versus investing. The real trap is going through your entire life staring at the nominal number, the balance, the salary, the price tag, and never once asking what it's actually worth. Inflation isn't some headline that flares up occasionally and fades away. It's the water you're swimming in every single day. It's quietly deciding, year after year, whether your money is working for you or working against you. And if you're wondering what happens when this force stops being polite, when a government decides to print its way out of trouble and inflation goes from 2% to 200% to a number with too many zeros to even read, that's a different story entirely, and it's the most terrifying one in all of economics. But for now, the next time someone tells you they're being smart by keeping everything in savings, or that they're rich because the number on the screen went up, ask them one quiet question: worth more, or just more dollars? Because the dollar is shrinking as we speak, and the only people who win are the ones who understood that before everyone else did.